Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our Arbitral Insights podcast series. I'm Gautam Bhattacharya. I'm a partner at Reed Smith, and this podcast is one in a special series of podcasts to celebrate South Asian Heritage Month in the UK. And I'm delighted today to have two of my fabulous colleagues on the podcast with me, Trisha Mitra-Veber, who is you'll find out in the course of this podcast, is an incredibly well-traveled and very interesting practitioner across many jurisdictions. And we'll talk a lot more with Trisha shortly. And with Pratheeba Vachiraveel, who is currently a trainee in our Global Commercial Disputes Group, but will very soon be qualifying into the firm. And I'm very proud of both of these ladies, as you will no doubt hear in the course of this podcast. And I'm very much looking forward to talking to them about a number of issues. So, Trisha, Pratheeba, welcome to you both. And thank you very much for being part of this podcast with me. I'm really looking forward to it. And I'm sure our listeners are going to really enjoy finding out all of the insights you're going to be sharing today. So let me begin with this, because one of the things that always fascinates me, Trisha and Pratheeba, is since we're lawyers, why we became lawyers. So if you could tell us, I'll start with you first, Trisha, because you, as I was mentioning in the introduction, you are a senior associate currently in the firm, but I'm sure that a title is going to change before too long. And you've practiced in India, mainland Europe, and now here in England and Wales. But tell us a little bit about what drove you to law, what inspired you to get into the law, and some of the people who have mentored you as part of that process.
Thank you, Gautam, and thank you for thinking of me for this podcast, firstly. Gautam, I'm a first-generation lawyer in my family. So I did not necessarily have sort of anyone within my sort of close family circle or even sort of families or friend circle to understand what the legal profession was. In fact, my parents wanted me to become a chartered accountant because I was good at business accounts. So actually my inspiration to become a lawyer was books by John Grisham. Some of you might have read Pelican Brief or The Firm or The Client or all these John Grisham books, which were basically legal thrillers, most of them set in the US and sort of the US criminal system, where I first sort of was like, oh, wow, this sounds really exciting. And back in high school, I used to be a debater and sort of thought that some of that could translate into what I was reading in these books. Of course, when I went to law school, the reality was different from I did my law school in India, so the reality was different, but I don't regret my choice one bit because it has been a hugely satisfying journey. And I've been lucky to have had mentors and figures within each of the organizations that I've worked with who have inspired me along the way. I started off my career as a lawyer in Bombay, in India, at a law firm called Parucha and Partners, where I was doing litigation, appearing before Indian courts. And I had some excellent mentors within that team, including Vivek Vashi, who was sort of a leading commercial litigator in Bombay. And then I was lucky enough to have worked with Sherman and Sterling in Paris, where the team was led by Emmanuel Gaillard, who is sort of, considered one of the fathers of international arbitration. And I was lucky enough to go to hearings with him, see how he molded case strategies, which was it was a masterclass really in arbitration. And then since then, I've also had at La Live, which is a Swiss boutique in London, I was lucky enough to see someone like Noradel Radiai, who is an excellent cross-examiner and who I was lucky enough to do hearings with. And she even second-chaired me when I did my first cross-examination to really learn firsthand those key advocacy skills that are so essential to being a dispute resolution lawyer. And now at Reed Smith, I think I cannot count the number of mentors that I have on one hand. I'm so lucky to be part of the Reed Smith community. Gautam, you've been sort of one of my inspirations within the team with what you've done both internally and externally during your time at Reed Smith. I'm lucky enough to work with Prat Samant, who is our head of Asia Pacific, and more recently with Elizabeth Farrell, who is just an all-round badass lawyer. So I think I found career inspirations in each stage of my journey, and I'm lucky enough to have had them.
Thank you very much for that, Trisha. Wonderful. So let me turn to you, Pratheeba. So you qualifying at the end of August.
Yeah.
And many congratulations on that. I've told you before, but I'm going to tell it to you and everyone on this podcast. That's another reason why I'm very proud of you. So tell us a little bit about what inspired you to become a lawyer and who's inspired you and mentored you along your journey so far.
I could say my mother, but she actually wanted me to become a doctor and my sister a lawyer, but we kind of swapped it. So maybe it was like a quiet rebellion or something. I don't know. But my interest in law didn't actually start with becoming a lawyer. It was a subject matter that I had some interest in. And I guess becoming a lawyer after you do law is kind of just one of those journeys that you take. But no, there wasn't really any specific moment that I thought I want to become a lawyer. It's kind of the build up towards it during law school, learning the intricacies of the law. And yeah, so it was really the journey through law school that kind of pulled me in the direction of taking law as a career. But since I started my VAC scheme at Reed Smith and did my SQE internship and my training contract, I've had so many mentors in each of my seats, and so many of those people of South Asian heritage, like yourself, Gautam, and Ravi Patani in corporate, Sakil, Vaibhav, so many people of South Asian heritage who I can look up to. And coming from Singapore, it's not really, Indians are a minority there. So it's nice to see a London city firm with all of these people of brown heritage in such prominent places. And I think it really pushes me to do better. And I think having had all of your guidance and how to be seen and to put myself out there has been really useful in my journey so far to qualification.
Thank you, Pratheeba. It's really good to hear your perspectives as well. And I remember when I first qualified, it was many years ago now, because I'm a lot older than you, but it's a very special moment. And so enjoy it and look forward to many, many more years of a successful career, Pratheeba. Let me turn back to you, Trisha, because you have a very interesting practice. You were talking about how you were telling us about your previous firms. You've worked with some great people at those firms, and you work with some fabulous people here at Reed Smith. And there's a big emphasis in your practice on international arbitration. And I know you cover a number of different areas in that discipline. Tell us a little bit about a couple of things, please, Trisha. One, how did you first get into international arbitration? And tell us a little bit about the thing that we can often do a lot more of in arbitration than we can do in litigation, and that's advocacy. So just share a few thoughts on those two things, please, Trisha.
Yeah, thank you. You're right that the majority of my practice is international arbitration. And the way I stumbled into it was at law school when I heard this term for the first time, and I was not sure what it meant. But all I knew was that it is quicker and cheaper than litigation, at least back in India. And that piqued my curiosity. But I still don't know what it was until I did the Vismoot. I did the Vis Eastmoot, which happens in Hong Kong. And through that process, I learned about this mythical creature called international arbitration, but which appealed to me because it seemed more commercial and more efficient and perhaps more effective than litigation in some countries. So that is how it happened to me. I stumbled into it. I as soon as I learned about it, I sort of pursued it with a vengeance. So I tried to find internships during my law school with firms that were practicing arbitration, then did a master's in it in Geneva called the MIDS, and then have sort of been practicing it ever since. And yes, I mean, advocacy is, there is a, so, I've practiced in Europe. I've practiced arbitration in Europe, in UK and in India. And in Europe, we do not have the sort of bar solicitor divide. So that meant that a lot of the advocacy was happening in-house from within the firms. And I was lucky enough to be able to give the opportunity to do advocacy at a few cases, both commercial and investment arbitration. I quite like doing advocacy because I think it introduces discipline/perspective from the very beginning of the case, because you're already thinking of how you're going to present it at the hearing. So I think that doing the advocacy, you already structure your pleadings in a certain way, you query the evidence in a certain way, knowing exactly how you would present it at the hearing. So I think that, my personal opinion is that everyone should do advocacy to take as many opportunities as they can get. And it is never too early to start, of course, with the right kind of case or client or even tribunal.
Thank you. And I agree with you, Trisha. I think it's so important to see it in the way that you've just mentioned. So, Pratheeba, let me turn to you then. So, you, of course, as I mentioned in the introduction, you're currently in your final seat at Reed Smith in the Global Commercial Disputes Group, and you've obviously been doing a lot of dispute resolution work. From your perspective, are there some things that have grabbed your attention about the world of disputes, be it arbitration, litigation, investigations, things that you've come across that you maybe hadn't thought you would have picked up on before you began your seat?
I think the first thing that I realized is you really have to take time to think about the law, which you do in law school, and then you join the legal industry, and then you realize you're not actually thinking about the black letter law as much anymore because you kind of know what you're doing, and then you just do it. It's like one way to do it, and you do it. But I think once I started in GCD, commercial disputes, I realized how much you really have to think about how you can use the law to your advantage or to help your client. And that's something I really liked because it requires an ability to understand what the law is asking of you and how you can fit your client's situation with the law and get the best outcome for your client. So that's one thing I ended up liking about disputes. And another thing is how it can very quickly become international. You've got all these parties and they can be from different countries, and you can have a judgment in one country but be enforcing it in another, and there's opportunity to work with counsel and experts all across the globe if you wanted to. So I really like the inherent international nature of it.
Thank you. Yeah, and I must say from what you've both said, Trisha and Pratheeba, if I look back to my younger self, which was many, many, many years ago, regrettably, I had exactly those same perspectives. I worked with my very first boss that I worked with as a trainee in the dispute resolution group, who then became my first boss when I qualified. And even though he's long retired, he remains a huge mentor of mine, and I'd still run through walls for him. He got a really important point across to me, which is that dispute resolution is international. So you've got to think international. And that was a message. That was one of the many messages I learned from him as a very young lawyer, and I've never forgotten. And I think that's so true. And the fact that we can learn from so many different clients and lawyers in other jurisdictions is a real privilege and a real blessing, actually. It makes us more broad-minded. And Trisha, you mentioned the importance of thinking about a case from the very beginning and how you're going to present it. Again, that is something I genuinely heard from my first boss. I should give him a name check. He's long retired, and I'm not sure whether he'll hear this podcast, but I hope he does, because he's still a very dear friend, Bob Goldspink, who was an incredible lawyer. He also got that into me. He always said, you've got to be thinking about 10 moves ahead. Don't just think about the next one. Think 10 moves ahead and think about how this is going to play out in due course. So it's actually, I feel very nostalgic just hearing what you both said, because it takes me back to so much of what I heard many, many, many years ago. So I'm glad we're all on the same page. So let me ask you this, because one of the things that, well, many things bind you together. You're both incredible people, great colleagues who I like and admire and respect hugely, but also, you're of South Asian heritage, which is something we'll talk about in a moment, but also that you're women, right? And one of the other great things about our profession is that women, rightly, over many years now, have been gaining more and more recognition for what they do, and are gaining more and more prominence, and have gained incredible roles and positions. So just share with us a little bit about your perspectives, because I regard you both as role models for women lawyers. I just tell us, if there's one thing that's most important to you in furthering advancing women in the law, what would that be? I'll start with you, Trisha.
Thanks, Gautam. I mean, that's a great question. And you're right that I think the number of women in the legal profession is increasing, which I think is only good news, because, you often see that in law schools, women perform as well as their male counterparts in the classes, but then there is a drop off at some point in the profession itself. I think I've been incredibly lucky to have worked at places where, the conversations about things like a pay differential or an opportunity differential didn't exist. What does sometimes exist, again, sometimes, is the unconscious bias. And it's not just in others. Sometimes I find myself checking my own unconscious biases. And as the conversation around it increases, and it does, especially at Reed Smith, it is something that people are cognizant of and trying to work positively on. The hope is that those biases melt away as well. How to further women in the legal profession, I think, is just by, actually, I'm going to quote the ex-CEO of Meta, Sheryl Sandberg. She wrote this book called Lean In. And she was talking about women bosses. So she was talking about women who've made it to the top of these sort of global companies, and how in a study you can find that women bosses fall in one of two categories. One is when they have been through a long, tough road to get to where they are and put their successors through that same long road in the belief that it toughens them up. But the second category is people who've been through on that long road, who then try to make it easier for the successive generations. And my personal belief is that, as someone who in the future hopefully will have a role to play in other women's careers, I would like to be in the second category. And, I've had bosses who fall in both of those categories, and I've personally benefited from those who fall in the latter, who have sort of lifted me up, mentored me, told me what the challenges would be and how best to navigate them. And I think that's the best way of furthering them, because technically I think we are all the same. So it's really sort of these other things, which are really unconscious biases, that remain to be dealt with.
Thank you, Trisha. And Pratheeba, what are your thoughts on that, please?
I think for me, it's starting with kind of taking up space and being unapologetic about the way you're being, not having the sense that you're a woman, so you should be gentle or be quiet or give in for certain things. And the female role models that I've had in the firm, they are all amazing women who stand their ground, and when they believe in something, they make sure that they get it. And I think that would be kind of the first step towards just normalizing the idea that men and women are equal in this industry, because obviously the history of the legal industry has is predominantly male. So, and there's always that inherent idea that, you're just a woman, or you're not going to make it as far as the males do in the industry. But I think the world has changed a lot, and the coming generations are very outspoken and wild, if I can say that. And I think the key is to just be unapologetic and just be yourself, and just, if you act the way that the males act, then, you know, there's nothing really stopping you from getting to where they are.
Spot on, and inspirational. I don't need to say any more. You've both said amazing things, so thank you for that. Now, this podcast, as I mentioned in the opening, is part of our special series to celebrate and mark and commemorate South Asian Heritage Month 2026. And I just wondered if you could share with our listeners what your respective heritages mean to you and how they make you better, how they strengthen you, how they really pull you up and give you identity, strength, drive, etc. So I'd be very interested if you could share some thoughts with our listeners on that. Let me start with you on that, Trisha.
Thank you, Gautam. I was thinking about this, and I think one of the common features of those of us from South Asian heritage is that we have a strong sense of community. And when brought into a professional context, I think that translates into being good team players, about thinking of the firm in a holistic way, getting involved in initiatives like you got them do. You're involved in so many internal firm initiatives. And I think that some of that comes from the sense of community that we have, of, being part of something larger than ourselves. The other thing is, for those of you who know India, which is what my heritage is that, it has 28 states, and so many different languages. And each part of the country is so different from each other culturally. Clothes, food, customs, everything is different. So in some way, one could say that it is sort of multilateral in its own way. And again, when brought into an international career, it sort of means that you're, from the very start, I was in spaces and environments where people's cultures were different from mine. And that infuse a sense of openness, about acceptance of other people's cultures, their thoughts, their ways of working, when put in a professional context, and respect for it. Another thing I think that sort of starting off working in India meant is that hard work and resilience were sort of ingrained in me. It is a country which, it used to be a developing country. It probably still is a developing country if one looks at the UN categorization. And that means that, you just have to work harder for your space. And I think that has held me in good stead throughout my journey, because it's made me sort of dedicated. It has taught me the value of perseverance. And the last thing, not necessarily in a professional sense, actually, no, even in a professional sense, I'm a big foodie. India has great food. And funnily enough, I have learned to use that in my business development, because it's sort of an extra thing you can discuss with your clients. So I think those are the many ways in which my culture has impacted me professionally.
Superb ways, I must say. So, Pratheeba, let me turn to you and ask you for your thoughts on that same issue.
My background is I was born and raised in Singapore, and I'm part of the Indian minority in Singapore. So that was it's kind of an interesting environment to grow up in, because Singapore kind of advocates for tolerance for other cultures and racial harmony. But at the same time, you are part of a minority, and that doesn't change. And so when I first moved to the UK, I was very aware of my cultural identity, and if there would be the same level of tolerance and how I would, gel with other people. But I think the biggest thing about South Asian culture, and I don't think it's exclusive to South Asian culture, but it's ingrained in South Asian culture, is resilience and taking pride in the work that you do. And I think that has really helped me in putting out good work, and doing my best at work, because no matter what you do, what I was taught by my dad and mom is that you do your best at it, and you make sure that you ask questions, you try, and whatever you do, you don't want to go back one day and regret the work that you had done. So the one thing that's really helped me to push through my training contract is, no matter how difficult it is, to make sure that I put out a piece of good work that I know that I'm proud of. And I think that putting in that work has definitely helped me in my journey to qualification. I also think growing up in Singapore, but then living in the UK and having that difference in cultures, I code switch a lot, and that's definitely helped me in the workplace, because you're speaking to so many different people from so many different cultures, so many, even in the UK, that come from so many different cities and towns. So having that ability to code switch and know what to say to different people or how to engage with different cultures, that's been really useful, not just internally, but also with clients.
Fantastic. No, I always love hearing other perspectives on heritage, because it's so important and so much part of us and what makes us us. And so hearing your thoughts from both of you, Trisha and Pratheeba, on that very important issue is really meaningful. And thank you for sharing that. Really good. Now, one of the things that I always like to do in any podcast I do, and this is going to be no exception, is I always like to end our podcasts with some more light-hearted questions which are totally unrelated to the subject matter of the podcast. And I'm going to use the host's license to do that. So I'm going to ask you both some more light-hearted things to round off this podcast. So now, I love my music, and I'm a big vinyl collector. So that is one of my sort of special hobbies. But if I was to ask each of you, have you got a favorite album or band or singer or type of music that just sums you up, that you love? I mean, is there something if you could share your thoughts on that? So Trish, let me start with you, and then I'll go to Pratheeba.
Sure. So I don't have a favorite of any of those categories, but I can tell you some of my many favorites if I can, Gautam, with your permission.
Of course, please.
So first, I will start with some Hindi music that I grew up listening to. So the first was A.R. Rahman, who is a music composer in India. For those of you who don't know him, he's considered sort of the Hans Zimmer of India. And if you know Slumdog Millionaire, he's the music composer, though I think he did better music for Bollywood movies. So A.R. Rahman would be my first one. The second is, when I was growing up, my mom made me listen to ABBA on loop. So I'm a huge ABBA fan, just sort of thanks to her. Then I'm a huge fan of Coldplay, of most of their work, except maybe the most recent album. But I'm a huge Coldplay fan, and I was lucky enough to attend their concerts. And I would go back anytime they are touring again. And the last is, when I was in Paris, I got introduced to French music, and I was really drawn to the melancholy of Charles Aznavour, who sang La Bohème, which is famous, but he's also sang some incredible other songs, which make you think what Paris would have been, in the 50s and the 60s. And I quite like that.
Super. I always knew you were a super trooper, Trisha. I now know that I can call you a super trooper, right? So that's all good. So Pratheeba, let me ask you the same question.
I actually listen to a huge range of music, so there's nothing that I really want to pick out. But if I had to say like something unique or special, then I guess it would be a lot of local Tamil, Singaporean, and Malaysian music. There's a lot of independent artists in Southeast Asia putting out Tamil songs, which I used to listen to when I was a teenager, and I still do every now and then while I'm drafting a contract or something. But yeah, so if I had to say something that's, a bit unique to my music taste, it would be that. But when I was a teenager, I also used to listen to a lot of British independent Tamil artists, which I didn't know at the time that they were British. But yeah, so yeah.
Well, that's great stuff. No. It's great to hear your respective musical tastes, and it just sums up heritage, right? Because each of you answered deep down inside from the roots of your heritage, which I think is revealing, because for those listening, I have no idea what our guests are going to say. So, for me, that just sums it up. It's about the roots of our heritage. So, well, that brings us to the end of our podcast. Trisha, Pratheeba, thank you both very much for being such wonderful guests and for sharing your thoughts so candidly and in such an entertaining manner. I really enjoyed talking to you. And it's amazing, when we do these podcasts, we learn about each other in a way that we didn't before, right? So I know both of you as great colleagues, but we've never spoken about the issues that we've been speaking about. And so I've learned a lot as well, and I hope our listeners enjoy this. So let me end by thanking you, Trisha and Pratheeba, for being such fabulous guests. So thank you, and bye-bye to our listeners.
Arbitral Insights is a Reed Smith production. Our producer is Shannon Ryan. For more information about Reed Smith's global international arbitration practice, email arbitralinsights@reedsmith.com. You can find our podcast on all streaming platforms, reedsmith.com, and our social media accounts at reedsmith.LLP. This podcast is provided for educational purposes. It does not constitute legal advice and is not intended to establish an attorney-client relationship, nor is it intended to suggest or establish standards of care applicable to particular lawyers in any given situation. Prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome. Any views, opinions, or comments made by any external guest speaker are not to be attributed to Reed Smith LLP or its individual lawyers. All rights reserved.